So as of today, I'm still waiting on my new axle shafts that I ordered for this thing, but I'm excited to get out and go wheeling, so I want to go ahead and fix as many things as I can so when those shafts come in, we can slap them in and get out and about. One thing that's been on my mind for a while is the rear hanger on these leaf springs. It's a thing that when these get rusty, they can rip out of the body, and mine aren't really rusty. They are a little bit, but with these 4-inch drop brackets, it creates enough leverage that it's actually ripping them out of the frame. So I'm going to cut all of that out. I'm going to re-weld the mount back onto the frame, plate it on, and get it nice and beefy, and that'll be one more thing knocked off the list. So we got to go ahead and drop this axle, and we'll get to work. Alright, well I didn't want to take the bumper off, but it wasn't that bad. And I think it'll make it a lot easier just to cut these whole corners off, just had the bumper out of the way. And then cutting all that off will save me a lot of time cutting these boxes out. So let's get to snipping. So I've been out here busy at work. I've gotten everything chopped off the frame and that all cleaned up. Then I started working on making some frame plates. So these guys here are essentially just going to weld to the frame. Pretty much a frame stiffener, but just on one side. These guys are going to mount underneath the frame. These holes here actually bolt through to where like a hitch receiver would go, or now my bumper does. Then that angle down is what's going to weld onto the leaf spring hangers. So theoretically, they should put the leaf spring hangers pretty much back in the same spot that they were, but everything is just going to be tied into the frame in a lot more places to make it a lot beefier. So now that everything's cut out, it's just time to start tacking to the frame and welding it on. So we made some really good progress yesterday. I got all the frame plates made and welded onto the frame, which doesn't sound like a lot, but definitely a pretty tedious job. So now the next part moving forward is we need to weld on the actual leaf spring hanger. And once we weld that on, we can kind of measure and cut our brackets that are going to support holding it on there. Okay, so I went ahead and just blasted these things all together. They came out decent, so I'll show you what we got. So pretty much we have our old rough country bracket down here. It's still 3/16 metal, totally fine to reuse. We cut our old original bracket completely out, plated the frame. Up here, I just have a bunch of spare little pieces of tube, so I just used some tube to come down. Figured that would be strong enough to hold it in place. And then this is some 3/16 plate. And I will eventually go back and drill 2 holes in here when I put the bumper on, and I can mark and drill them. And then that will be the other 2 bumper holes on this side, which is awesome because back before I took the bumper off, these 2 bolts were actually stripped in the factory frame. And then underneath, excuse my terrible overhead welding, but also this will bolt up in onto the bumper. I was slightly concerned about this whole area wanting to push upwards and cave in the frame since it's so thick. So having it bolt down below here to the bumper and sandwiching it will provide a lot stiffer area for it to attach to without, rotating and crushing the frame in. But yeah, overall, not bad. All right, so the paint has finally dried on the new leaf hangers. Also, in the meantime, my new axle shaft showed up and new brake pads. So I went ahead and threw all those together. The axle shafts are from Dutchman Axle Shafts. I really couldn't find many options for like a chromoly rear axle shaft for these Wagoneer Dana 44s. Realistically, they were the only option, I think. And they were about $600 shipped. So not terrible for a set of chromos, but hopefully this should be beefy enough to be able to hold up. And now both the axles are 100% fully built. Because beforehand I was running stock shafts in the rear. So yeah, that's all together. Time to bolt this up. But we actually have one more thing. So the rear leaves in here, there's some Rubicon Express leaves. They've gotten bowed over the years, as well as the bushings keep blowing out in them. So I've replaced the bushings numerous times, and the bushings I keep putting in there, I can only find rubber ones for them, and they blow out within like a couple of times on the trail. So these leaves are cooked. I want to get rid of them. I was going to do some Chevy 56s on the back of here, but Kerry actually hit me up. I needed some help doing some excavating in his front yard. He had a water line bust. And trading for that labor, he actually gave me the old leaves off his XJ, which are some rough country leaves, so not super high end or anything. But they've got good bushings, and they look to be in decent shape, so that's a super cheap and easy swap out. So we're going to go ahead. I have a 1-inch offset plate on my current leaves. We're going to swap that over these rough country ones, slap them on, and bolt it all together. So like I said, you can see these bushings are in fantastic shape. So these are old, but definitely a better option. They seem to have kind of a similar arch. They're both 4-inch lift leaves. So in general, the rough country has 5 leaves, and the Rubicon Express, if I didn't add one in, would have 6 leaves. I might end up pulling out one of these leaves and adding it to the Rubicon pack, just because this Jeep is not only heavier than factory, but also it gets really loaded down with all like tools, camping gear, fluids, all that kind of stuff. So having a little bit heavier duty leaves to hold that weight is nice. So I'm going to yank these apart to add my 1-inch offset plate, and I'm probably going to grab a leaf and move it over to the rough country pack too. So these are a pretty cool product from Off-Road Design. Essentially it's just a plate with drilled and tapped holes. And what this allows you to do is to move the center pin on your leaf springs to stretch or shorten the wheelbase. So the actual center pin on the leaf springs will bolt directly in, and then you can offset this nub wherever you want that will drop down into the perch on the axle tube. So pretty cool. I have my wheelbase stretched about 1 inch, and honestly, it's about the same wheelbase once you add as much lift as I have. So we've got this rear suspension all buttoned up. I played around with it a little bit, and I ended up only using 1 leaf that was off of that Rubicon Express pack. So essentially, it's the rough country pack plus 1 additional leaf. And again, I'm mostly doing that just because obviously the back of this weighs a lot more than a stock XJ. With the cage being on it, rear bumper, spare tire, all the tools and spares and everything that's loaded in the back, it's going to need a little help from whatever like the factory, you know, rough country setup is. The rear shackle mounts look awesome on here. So I did move these guys slightly further back, and that just gives me some options in the future if I want to swap to that Chevy 56 leaf I was talking about, or a Ford 57, or you know, a GM 63 or 64, whatever people call them. But anyways, it's all set up, it's ready to go wheel, everything's torqued. One last thing to note is if you guys are ever doing rear suspension, make sure that your U-bolts that go to the axle and you know all the leaf spring bolts are all torqued once the weight of the vehicle is fully on the axle. This is particularly important if you're using rubber bushings like what these leaf springs have. Because if you tighten and clamp that inner sleeve in the wrong direction, it's just going to cause excessive wear to the bushings and just rip them apart a lot quicker. I'm still going to need to see where this settles once I put the spare on and everything else, because obviously it's sitting a little bit high right now. But if it settles roughly 1 inch, I think we're going to be about perfect. So we're getting super close to getting this thing back on the trail. I still have a couple things I need to do. Shout out to that one guy a few videos ago that called out my transmission mount was probably bad because that shifter link disconnected. He was absolutely right. It was causing all sorts of like nasty vibrations and bad noises too, since that drive line was moving around. So appreciate you, can't remember the name, but thanks for looking out. Definitely excited to get this thing back on the trail and get out back in the woods. Maybe some snow wheeling since now it's winter time. If you guys enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with somebody. I don't care, do whatever you want. My name is Jake, this is Machines Inc. Thanks for watching.